things that I find particularly engaging is not only the painted surface, but the underpaint. And that's something that you don't see very often in compositions like this one. Now, in this composition, one of the things that I find so particularly interesting is that most of the reds that I've been studying seem to be overpainted with a brown, but it's in a brown umber color. You can see what I mean if you look a little more carefully at something along the lines of this, so that this composition, to me, the entry point would be about here, and you'll note that this movement is going to carry the viewer's eye up, over, and beyond what I call Mont Saint-Victoire in the background. And when you're studying the work, I hope that you will take a special care in studying the overpaint, because so much of this is adding to a textural quality to the painting. Also, even though as I look at the painting, you might note that it is devoid of humanity. However, even though I don't see any people wandering the roads or entering farmyards or things like that, I sense there's a great liveliness to this composition. And like most great works of art, the longer that you enjoy the work, I think the more you're going to be finding in the painting itself.
You know, when I look at a painting like this, the first thing that jumped up was Cézanne. You know, another artist that I'll talk about in a moment is Van Gogh, and I think there's a little bit of both of those in this painting. And you know, when we think about young artists or artists, even in their maturity, relying very heavily upon the work of those that came before them, and this is always a very difficult balance when you talk about creation, and whether that's for painters or whether that's for our students here at the college. You know, how much of the tradition are you digesting and how much are you altering it, sort of learning from the past so that you can create a different future. And even Cézanne himself, when he talked about his own work, in a letter that he wrote at the same year that The Bathers that's going around was completed, wrote a letter to a colleague of his saying that the Louvre in Paris is the place where we learn how to read. But that's not enough, right? That's where we learn how to read, but that's only so that we can create our own language based on our study of nature. And so there's this combination here of learning from the past, and I think here, excuse me, certainly with the bathers themselves and the composition with the bathers at the corners, but also the way, especially with the angles of the figures at the side, that it really sets this kind of geometry coming from the lower corners and moving inward. A lot of the brushstroke that you see here, I think clearly shows that Diane Esmond spent a lot of time looking at Cézanne. They're not very fluid strokes. They're things that are very structural. They're geometric, almost kind of fractal. When you look at the solidity of these things. And so there's a lot of Cézanne here. At the same time, there's a lot of things that you would never find in Cézanne. Right? And if you look, especially in this passage over here, where the brushstroke gets much freer, it gets more loose, it's more open. And in that case, there's a lot of Van Gogh in there. Right? And you know, when we deal with Van Gogh and Cézanne in the classroom, at least the way that I deal with it, you have these two contemporaries who are sort of approaching the visual arts kind of from fundamentally different angles. One being structural, geometric, universal, solid, with Cézanne, and the other being expressive, emotive, subjective, personal, experiential with Van Gogh. And it's interesting to watch a painter like Diane kind of play between those things, that is sort of trying to articulate her own language through integrating disparate elements of languages from the past.
I was immediately drawn to this painting. If you've ever taken an art history course, or you've ever opened an art history book, or if you do that, you'll see the immediate affinities between this painting and Cubism, right? Braque, Picasso, maybe around around the year 1910, something like that. But also, there's a kind of sensibility in here, because she was painting later than that time, I also feel like it was going through other filters in a way. There was this whole de style, sort of during the 1920s and so on, that was happening in the Low Countries, and various aspects of Cubism as they're being explored. So from that standpoint, that is of interest in terms of what we're seeing around the room. That so much of what Diane does in her paintings is about the stroke, right? It's about the stroke and its various manifestations. And sometimes it's a very structured stroke, and sometimes it's very kind of open. Here, it's like even what's, say, ostensibly one color zone, the gray or whatever, it's always textured and expressed as a physical stroke. And from the standpoint of music, I like to share with my students a lot. You know, you hear, say, a recording of Glenn Gould playing the piano, and you're just so aware of his body. You hear him singing, you hear the bench creaking. It's like the expressive qualities of the music are an outgrowth of the physical sort of gestures that are required in order to make it happen. And so I think all of her work, in some way, is exploring that dimension, because the anti-model, or another model, would be painters who keep the hand kind of quiet. Like you can't detect the stroke, right? So it's happening in various ways. Here, what I want to point out about this is that, I don't know, you've got this kind of diagonal piece here that looks like, if we're thinking maybe in that Cubist vein, is this sort of like a table that we're meant to see in perspective? Because diagonals are like a telltale sign of spatial depth and that something is receding, right? So are we to read these and that surface as the surface of a table and that's some space around it? But then what she does, she often just uses vertical lines, whether it's in that zone or this zone. And the vertical lines tend to sort of, if you can kind of catch what's going on, cancel the spatial depth by just emphasizing frontality, right? And so I think that has a very Cubist feeling about it. There's the invitation to go deep into the painting on the one hand, and then there's the cancellation of the gesture on the other.
Painting of Diane Esmond very interesting because of the way she has used or handled the empty space. And what is interesting is also the minimal strokes that she has used in the composition. With such, real minimal lines, she has created so much depth in the composition, and I think that's what was very interesting. And also just leaving the empty space in the composition also was what really attracted me, is because it reminded me of Hokusai's work, where Hokusai uses, just the pen. He does pen and ink. He has done many drawings of pen and ink where he always said, use circle and squares, and with that circle and square you can create like a beautiful composition or a design pattern. And I think when you look at Diane's work, you can see that minimal quality and that circle and square kind of format that she has used, and also how she has played with that empty space, which creates so much depth. And I think the empty space becomes really a very important part of the composition.
Vanguard. It was not part of that. It was in a style that was older at the time when she was doing it. It was more, she was inspired by the late 19th century artists. And she combined it. She had a distinctive style of her own, but it was more in the tradition of those older painters. So it was not as fashionable at the time. So I think that's probably how the art market works. I don't know if you're studying art history, but the art market does weird things. And it doesn't necessarily put a premium on how beautiful something is, but it might be how shocking it is.
Yeah.
Again. I have to admit that I'm so happy to be here. I feel at home here. It's natural. You can't transplant an old plant and hope that it will grow. My subjects are compositions, and at the source of the compositions are figs, grapes, a wine bottle. I hate to call them still lifes, but that is what they are. Raymond Mason came to my studio 2 days ago and was stunned by my work. One is so critical and difficult for oneself. Fortunately, he adored my landscape of Les Beaux. He said he hadn't seen such good painting for ages, then it is far better than the work of many people who have already made a name for themselves. We both agreed that one only worked well when in love with the subject, when one had really felt an emotion. My feelings and thoughts and hopes change every minute. Hope and despair, passion and hate are all tearing themselves apart within me until I pull myself together and achieve what I think is worthwhile. My work interests me because I'm definitely changing. I know what I want, and that is the essential thing. I will get there if I keep faith and courage, which I will. I'm striving for color, simplicity, and less figurative. Hope is what keeps us alive and keeps us going. I came here today all of a sudden. Hidden village on a rock, leading down to the Mediterranean near Naples. I had to get away and change what was before my eyes. So here I am, alone, on one of my hard-working trips. Hard because I'm thrown into a new world, all alone with myself, and have to come out on top. I only arrived this evening, so I can't tell you what is in store for me. All I know is that it won't be easy, because my work won't depend on what I see, but what I am.